Good afternoon, everybody, and so glad you're here with us. We've got 82 people in the audience so far. My name is Colin Steinman. I'm Curator of Education here at the Georgia Museum of Art, and I'm so pleased to welcome you to today's program. So without further ado, I'm going to hand things over to Nelda Damiano, who's our PR Dora Curator of European Art, to begin today's presentation.
Thank you, Colin, and I want to welcome everyone and thank everyone for being here this afternoon. I think it's going to be a real treat. And so we are presenting this lecture in conjunction with the exhibition by Kotezawa, The Crime of Art, which will run until December 5th. So if you have a chance to come and see it, we're open every day except on Monday and late on Thursday, and it is free admission. And we're thrilled to have Anthony Amore here to talk to us about his experience. He is the Director of Security and Chief Investigator at the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, where he has spent the last 16 years securing the collection and investigating the heist of 13 stolen works of art in March of 1990. Prior to joining the museum, he was a federal agent and also worked for the Department of Homeland Security, rebuilding security at Logan Airport in Boston after the attacks of 9/11. He has written 3 national bestsellers on the topic of art crime, among which I think you see the slide already maybe, Stealing Rembrandts, The Untold Stories of Notorious Art Heists, which came out in 2011. And he is regarded as one of the world's leading experts in the field. So we are very excited to hear what he has to say, but we will behave knowing his background as federal agent and Department of Homeland Security. So Anthony, I will leave it to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nelda. I appreciate it. Thank you for the introduction. And thank you everybody for joining me today. It's really a pleasure for me to be part of the University of Georgia's program. I was really excited to come to town, but we thought safety should come first. And I was in full agreement with the university related to the ongoing pandemic. But we still have a great presentation for you today. And I'd like to start by bringing up this book. And I'm not too humble to pitch my own book, but that's not why I'm showing it to you. As Nelda said in my introduction, I started my career in Homeland Security. That was the first half of my career, 15 years in that field. And when I made the switch over to art security and art theft investigations, it was a leap because there's not a lot of similarities between trying to prevent terrorism and trying to find stolen art. So I had to get up to speed really quickly. And I did take some techniques that I learned as an investigator with the government, and I am a person that likes to gather a lot of data. So as soon as I came on board, I decided I'm going to look into every major art heist that has happened in the last 100 years. And I set up this big database to profile art heists, and I still have it. And the database has about 1,400 heists in it at this point. And it recorded everything from like the day of the week thefts happen to the sorts of people who steal them, how long it takes to find them, how many pieces are usually stolen during a heist, is there violence used, are there weapons, what sorts, are the guards injured, what artist is stolen the most often, that sort of thing. And the first lesson I learned was art theft is far too big a field for me to do that in a timely manner. I mentioned I've accumulated 1,400 heists, but that's over 16 years. Right away, I learned if I want this to be a valuable exercise, this profile, I needed to narrow my field. So I decided, well, the Gardner had been robbed of 3 of its Rembrandts, 3 of its 4 Rembrandts. So let me focus on Rembrandt. And it turned out to be a good choice, unbeknownst to me, but I quickly learned that Rembrandt, when you look at the body of work, is the most often stolen artist. And there's a good reason for that. And that's because Rembrandt is so well known. If you look at the artists whose works have been victimized by theft in history, you'll recognize all the names. There's no mysteries in there. And that's because thieves who steal art, one of the first big lessons I learned, are not the sorts that people like to imagine. And I'm going to get into that with you. But the other things I learned, though, great interest to me, was that art is stolen so often that in terms of international trafficking, it's one of the top crimes in terms of third after illicit drug trafficking, weapons trafficking. There's art. It's a multi-billion-dollar per year illicit industry. And as I also learned, nowhere does it happen as badly as it does in Massachusetts. And you can take every interpretation of the word badly. Massachusetts is a horrible place for great masters, for fine art. So it's just a sampling of some of the artists whose works were in Massachusetts and were stolen. I mean, it's really a who's who of artists. But again, it's big names, right? It's people that everyone has heard of. It's not a surprise, you know, this idea that some private collector of some obscure piece of art is hiring some cat burglar to go get the art for him to enjoy in his underground lair is the stuff of movies. This is the first example I want to share with you, and it's the first most significant art heist, I believe, that happened in the United States. I'm going to talk to you about three, and I'm going to argue that they're the three most significant in history. And they all took place in Massachusetts. And the first one that I'm going to speak to you about took place in 1972. And this is your mastermind, Al Munday. I was speaking to Colin before the presentation, and we were looking at photos of Al. And I have this photo was taken 10 years after the first one I have, and he's wearing that same tracksuit because he likes to try to look like a mobster. And he's always smoking. And he was a prolific crook and better educated than most of your art thieves. People love to envision Pierce Brosnan being this masterful thief who pulls off these fascinating, well thought out heists at museums, or like the Sean Connery type in Entrapment. But that's not at all what you see in the real world. It's nothing even close. Art theft in the real world doesn't resemble Bond movies or these types of thrillers. They resemble Coen brother films with sloppy and almost comedic, but always dangerous career criminals who steal all sorts of things. So the idea of a professional art thief, mark my words, next time you see a big art heist has happened and you read a news story about it, you'll see someone say this was the work of professional art thieves. Well, that's really never the case. I can count on one hand, literally, the number of people who have stolen masterpieces more than once. And there's a good reason for that. People like Al Munday steal a masterpiece, and the story, through the story I'm going to tell you in a second. And they learn that it's not a great crime and they don't do it again. I've spent a lot of time studying the outliers, the people who do it more than once, and there are very few. So Al was a graduate of Providence College in Rhode Island, and he knew a lot about art because his mother was a student of art and antiques, and she would teach Al and his brother about these things that she loved. Now, his name is Florian, as you can see there. But at the time, in the late 60s, early 70s, there was a show on television, very popular, starring Robert Wagner, and it was called To Catch a Thief. And he played that quintessential, very handsome, debonair, brilliant cat burglar. And his character's name in the show was Al Munday. So because Florian Munday was such a prolific thief, stealing everything within his reach, people started calling him Al, just like the TV character. So today he goes by Al Munday. And when I say steal everything, I mean it. He would steal lots of jewelry, but please don't picture, this major heist at a very high-end jewelry store. This is the sort of guy that would maybe break into someone's home and steal a lot of jewelry, or maybe break into a pawn shop and steal it. And he would steal cars and guns and you name it. And what he learned was that you don't make a lot of money doing that. In real life, these guys who are thieves, they live job to job, and they're at the mercy of what they can get from the fence, the person through whom they sell their stolen goods. And it's typically about a 10% payday. So if Al stole a car worth $2,500 back in the early 70s, he's going to get about $250. And sounds like easy money, but Al has great visions of grandeur. He sees himself as, he's a narcissist. He's definitely a narcissist. He sees himself as very, very clever, smarter than all of us. He decides, why am I settling for these small-time scores? And he was taking courses at Assumption College, which is in Worcester, Massachusetts. It's in central Mass. It's about an hour away from Boston with traffic. And he tells me that one day he was leaving Assumption College and he saw across the street from him the Worcester Art Museum, and it struck him, why not steal multi-million-dollar paintings and get 10% for those? Now that would be a real job worth doing for him. So he started going to the art museum, and in a great illustration of how these people choose what they're going to steal, he didn't look for the artist he liked the most. His favorite artist is Renoir, and the Worcester Art Museum has works by Renoir, but he wasn't interested in those because his goal, like virtually every other art thief, is money. Now, when I talk to you today, I'm talking about the theft of masterworks, but some of these rules apply to all. So even when people steal lesser known artists, it's because of money. It's not because they want to hang it on their wall. That's a fodder for television. So Al goes through the museum and picks the 4 works that he thinks would be the most valuable. He settles on 2 works by Gauguin. He sees a painting by Picasso, and he sees Rembrandts. Now, Rembrandt is at the center of all of these art thefts. As I mentioned, he's the most often stolen artist. And there, as I said, everyone knows Rembrandt. So if you go into, I don't know if there's an Athens high school, but if there is, if you go into Athens High and you go to the freshman, freshman homeroom, and you say, how many of you have heard of Jackson Pollock? Very few hands are going to go up. And if you said, how many of you have heard of Mark Rothko? Again, few hands. If you said, how many of you have heard of Rembrandt? All the hands are going to go up. Now, that doesn't mean they can all identify a Rembrandt, but it means they've all heard of him. And when you're an artist whose name is well known and you're from a long time ago, some obscure period in the past, people automatically assume value. And in the case of Rembrandt, they're correct. So every major city has a Rembrandt, and every one of them has been targeted. Mark my words, there's no city where Rembrandt hasn't been targeted or stolen. So Al goes through, he looks at these paintings, and he spends a lot of times, makes a lot of visits studying the art and looking at the way that painting is secured to the wall, checking out the security in the galleries, whether it be electronic or in terms of guards. And that's what makes art theft attractive to these thieves. If you want to go steal jewels from a very high-end jewelry store, well, if you go in and at least here in Boston, a lot of the stores, they buzz you in and buzz you out. And if they take out jewels and an armed guard is standing near you, you don't think anything about it. You understand. If you go to a bank and the teller is behind bulletproof glass, you get it. You know that the vault is not going to be open with a bunch of cash in it just out there for you to grab. However, if you go to a museum and you decide you're going to go there one day a week for a month and just stand in front of a painting for 10 minutes at a time, no one's going to say a word to you, because that's why the painting's there. You can get pretty close to it. You can study it. You can walk around and take your time. You can blend in. These are things you can't do at other places that have high-end goods in them. Now, I want to be clear, just for the record, I don't view art as high-end goods, but I'm talking pragmatically from an investigative standpoint. So Al would do this. He would look at the everything having to do with the art in terms of how it was secured. And he came to the conclusion that he could steal this stuff. So he was smart enough to say, I'm not going to do this myself. Why put myself in that jeopardy? He had a couple of underlings in their very early 20s that he could assign to do this, a couple of up-and-coming thieves who, again, robbed everything they could, whether it be a corner store or a used car or someone's home. And he went over the plan with them, and he explained to them how this theft would be pulled off. And he told them, listen, the guards in the museum are old men, they're unarmed, they can't take on tough, young, rough guys like you. Here's how the paintings are secured. And I have a whole plan about how you'll blend in. So on the appointed day, Al needed a getaway car for his guys, and he sent a third guy to go steal this. This is his getaway car. Now, he needed a station wagon because one of the Gauguin paintings, The Brooding Woman, is large. It's on a panel and would not fit easily into the backseat of a car. So he assigned his car thief to steal a station wagon. And those of you, I know Colin and Nelda from my prior discussions are not old enough to remember this, but those of you around my age will remember that station wagons only came in one size, and that was enormous. So that right there is a compact station wagon, and that's what they use. So one of his guys steals his car, he brings it to Al's house, and on the appointed day in May 1972, the thieves come to the house, and Al goes over the plan with them again, and they're at his house pretty early in the morning. And that's because the theft is going to occur while the museum is wide open. Now, most people imagine art theft is something that's done by a guy with a balaclava rappelling through the skylight in the pitch black of night. But most art theft are smash and grab style, slightly more. They happen during the day. And there's a very good reason for that. If you try to break into a museum at night, you're trying to break into a fortress. And every bit of security technology is on, waiting for you. Now, you might beat it, but that's when it's at its peak in security. But if you go to the museum while the museum's open, you're halfway there. You don't have to figure out how you're going to get in. You can walk right in. And that's what Al's plan for his two henchmen was. Now, his plan also assumed that visitors at the museum would stay put when they saw his guys taking the paintings off the wall, because they would assume they were employees of the museum. Why would they assume that? Well, Al gave both of his guys blue windbreakers to wear so that they would be dressed similarly, so that visitors might think they belong there. Now, he also gave them both ski masks, which are not the fodder for employees of a museum, but it was May in Massachusetts, and May can be pretty cold, and it's not weird to see someone wearing a rolled up wool cap. And that's how they were dressed. And just before it was time for them to go, they sort of had a stare off with Al, and Al said, "What's holding you up here?" And the thieves said, "Where's our gun?" And Al said to them, "What do you mean a gun? There's no gun in this plan. This is a smash and grab." And they said, "Well, we're not doing this without a gun. We need a gun." And he argued with them and said, "Listen, I've talked to you about the guards. They're elderly men, they're unarmed. They can't put up a fight with you. In fact, museum guards aren't there to put up a fight. Go to any museum. We don't have Navy SEALs working. We have gallery guards to observe and report." And they said, "Well, we're not doing it without a gun." So Al wanted these paintings, and he went to his bedroom and went to his nightstand and took out a stolen revolver he had, because, you know, who doesn't have a stolen revolver in their nightstand? So he brings it to them, and they're happy now. They turn to leave. They look inside, and they see the chamber has no bullets. And they go at it again, and Al returns with one bullet for them, one. And I can remember him telling me this over breakfast one day. He held the bullet out to them, and as they reached for it, he pulled it back and said, "Don't put blood on my paintings." Now, he didn't really mean that literally. He meant it figuratively. Al was smart enough to know that stealing the paintings is one thing, and it wasn't regarded as a major crime the way it is nowadays. Stealing them would be a big deal. Shooting someone in the commission of a theft would be a much bigger deal and bring much more heat. And the thieves told him, "No, of course not. We know that's not part of the plan." So off they went in their station wagon to the Worcester Art Museum, and this is a picture of it at the time. At the bottom of the picture, you can just make out a corner and edge of a big mosaic. The Worcester Art Museum has one of the biggest collections of Antioch mosaics in the United States. And they have those rails to deter people from walking on the mosaic. And the two thieves walk in, and they don't walk on the mosaic, and they head for the staircase because the paintings are on the second floor. As they go up that first set of stairs, there are two young females, not much younger than them. They're high school seniors, who are standing there, and they're particularly attractive. And the two thieves, who were warned by Al, "Don't do anything to stand out. Stop and say to those girls, you should wait here. Something big's going to happen." So the girls sit on that bench. Now, that you will never see in a film about a clever thief, right? The last thing in the world you want to do is tell witnesses, hey, we're going to do something big here. But that's what they did. So the thieves walk up these stairs, and I'm hoping you're getting the drift that they're not master thieves like you'd imagine. And they go to the galleries and they take these 4 paintings, but Al's plan works. Nobody says a thing to these guys. They've just taken Picasso and Rembrandt and Gauguin, and no one wants to say anything because they've never seen this before. Here's a hint. We don't take these paintings down at a museum while we're open. There's a reason you haven't seen it before, but nobody said a word to them. The thieves walked down those stairs, down the second set of stairs, and then they walked right onto the mosaic. Now, to the left in that photo, you can't see it, but that's the entryway, and the car's parked right outside in a circular drive, waiting for them. And there's a guard right at that door, an elderly guard named Phil Evans, and the thieves are seen by him, and he yells to them, hey, you two, stop. And they stop, and they figure they're caught, and he says, get off the mosaic. So they take a deep breath, and they continue walking, but he slowed them down enough to notice, thank God, that they were carrying these 4 paintings. And then he yells for them to stop again, and then the thieves realize he's onto them. And what do? They take the gun, and they shoot the guard. And the shot hits him somewhere between his navel and his hip. It's a really bad injury. Now, I know you're all of you are probably museum goers, and as you can see in this picture, hopefully, this is a marble and cement hall, and it's very big. It's called Renaissance Court. And well, you're in Georgia, so you probably have heard a gun being shot before, and I mean that from a sportsman point of view, of course. And you know it's very loud if you don't have ear protection on. So everyone in this area is scared, obviously. Who wouldn't be, right? And it's a piercing sound. And now there's a guard on the floor, and he's bleeding profusely. And the thieves just basically step over him, and they go to the car. Fortunately for the guard, he had just at that moment been giving directions to a visitor who was a nurse who saved his life. So God was smiling on him in his misfortune that day, and he was saved. The thieves went to the car. They took the 3 smaller paintings, and they put them in the back seat. The driver got behind the wheel, and his accomplice took the larger painting. And you remember why I told you they got the station wagon for the big painting to go in the way back. Well, he didn't do that. He got into the car, put the painting on the roof, and held his arm out the window and held the painting on the roof. Just imagine seeing this, a Gauguin on the roof of a getaway car. Just absolutely mind-boggling. But for all their bumbling and for their horrible act of violence, they've pulled off the heist, and they're gone. They pull away, and they've made off with the 4 paintings. Now, this is the Rembrandt that was stolen that day. It's absolutely gorgeous. It's of St. Bartholomew, one of the apostles, and Rembrandt painted him 3 times in his career. And in each time, it's a similar pose, but it's a vastly different looking St. Bartholomew. This one, if you can see it in person, you see it has all the earmarks of a great Rembrandt. The light emanates from the subject. It's disputed whether it's real. In fact, in the movie, there was a movie with Bradley Cooper and I forget the other guy's name. He played Batman. I'm sorry, I'm forgetting. Christian Bale. And they were in a film, and they're looking at this painting and discussing that it's a fake, but it's not a fake. This is a Rembrandt. And great Dutch scholars have studied it and determined it's a Rembrandt. Just beautiful, staggeringly beautiful. But in the center, you can see, hopefully you can make out that he's holding a knife, and that's a flaying knife. And the reason he's holding that is because the great masters would paint martyred saints holding or standing by the instrument of their martyrdom. And St. Bartholomew was skinned alive at the stake. And this resonates with me because I went to Catholic school from grades 1 through 8 at St. Bartholomew School. And I remember Sister Martina telling us when we were in the first grade what had happened to St. Bartholomew. And when you're 6 and you hear that story, it stays with you throughout your life. So now, 48 years later, I'm still talking about St. Bartholomew being skinned alive. But this is just a magnificent painting. Al now has it. The thieves are home free. Al says he hid these in the drop ceiling of his home. Not possible. They're too big, but they were in his home in Worcester. And the thieves, it's about 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And what do they do to go celebrate their success? They go to a bar. That's what these sorts of guys do. And Worcester is the sort of town where the bar is packed at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So they go in and they have a couple of drinks, and suddenly the news pops on television, breaking news. Now, those of you who are old enough to remember know that there was a time when the TV flashed breaking news, and that meant there was actual news breaking. Nowadays, you put on any news channel at any time and it says breaking news, but this was the days when that made your stomach sink. It usually meant there was a war somewhere or an assassination or a celebrity had died. I remember when it was breaking news that John Lennon had died. I mean, that sort of thing, it was momentous. So everybody hushed in the bar, and suddenly the local newscaster comes on. So people are really attentive, and he says, breaking news out of Worcester. So of course, the bar, you can hear a pin drop. And he says, there's been a robbery at the Worcester Art Museum. Rembrandts and Picasso and Gauguin have been stolen. A guard has been shot. He's critically injured. The thieves are at large. They're armed and dangerous. FBI and the state police are on the scene. Details at 6. So, wow. You can imagine a bunch of ruffians in a very tough bar see this on the TVs, and they stop murmuring, wondering who could this have been. And the 2 thieves are there, and they see this, and they point at the TV and say, hey, that was us. Now, it sounds incredible, but it's true. And this is what the thieves did. And people are onto them immediately. In fact, I don't know if there's any criminal justice students tuning in, or any police officers or retired investigators. I think you'll agree with me that when people confess to a crime in front of their community moments after the crime, that's a very good lead. And it was a good lead. And the police were onto those 2 right away, and they were very soon arrested. And there they are. There, I put those handy yellow arrows for you so you could distinguish the bad guys from the good. And I love these period crime photos, right? Now, imagine nowadays if a guy had shot and maybe killed a guard at the museum, attempted and stolen these masterpieces, he would hardly be handcuffed in front of himself with a cigarette dangling from his fingers, talking to the cops. But this was a different era, and they did things differently back then. So Thorin and Carlson were the 2 thieves that took these paintings, but of course they don't have them anymore. And they weren't talking. They weren't going to give up Al Monday, but they didn't have to. Everybody knew these 2 worked for Al. They knew that they were part of his gang. So it was easy. These same cops that you're looking at went to Al's house, and he wouldn't let them in. He was a wise guy, and they let him know they'd be watching him. So he knew he had to get rid of these paintings somehow, had to at least get them out of his home. So Al took these 4 paintings and decided to hide them. And of course, if this was in a movie, they would be hidden, behind a bookcase, and you pull a handle and the bookcase turns around. There'd be a secret compartment, that sort of thing. But no, he took them across the border to Rhode Island, to a place called the Pachillo Pig Farm, which was the most polluted place in the United States. It was the first EPA Superfund site. And he went to a hayloft in this pig farm and hid the paintings there. Sounds crazy, but who's going to look there for these paintings? And that's where they were. So not only did the good guys know that Monday was the key to this, but the bad guys knew too. So what happened was 2 thieves who were out on bail awaiting sentencing for a home invasion figured they needed to get a break with the judge. So what they did was they grabbed a gun. They went to Al's house, they stuck it in his ribs, and they said, take us to the paintings. And he did. They drove to the pig farm. They got the paintings and they gave them to the judge. And the judge gave them a very small break in their sentence, caused a big uproar in the courtroom. They got up and they screamed that they had been ripped off by the judge. But why shouldn't they be? So these are the investigators. When I spoke to Al, he told me there were 200 investigators on this case. These are the 200 investigators you're looking at right here. He loves to be grandiose. But in the center, you see the large painting, Brooding Woman by Gauguin that should have been in the back of the car. And in front of it, another Gauguin portrait. On the left, you see Woman and Child by Picasso. And in the distance, you can see an unframed Rembrandt, St. Bartholomew. Al took the frame off and threw it in the river because he felt like the frame was weighing him down, which is real loss. Frames are art as well. But what's important are two things. The paintings came home without incident in short order. The bad guys were caught and made to pay. And most importantly, Phil Evans, the guard who was shot, fully recovered and was able to return with the painting for the celebration. You see, they put it in a new, decidedly un-Dutch frame, an ornate gilded frame. But Philip was there for that, so that's great. Now, the reason I tell you the story is because so many reasons. It's really illustrative of the sort of people who steal these things. It's illustrative of the bumbling that really does happen stranger than fiction type things happen during these art thefts. And also because this is the first time in history that art was stolen from a museum at gunpoint. And of course, it set a horrible precedent. Now, Al is very proud of being the father of armed art robbery. He was even on MSNBC not too long ago, taking credit for it. But I think you'd all agree, eventually somebody would have used a gun in the robbery. Nevertheless, that's the first most important. And of course, it happened here in Massachusetts. Now, it was hardly the last time. In 1975, just 3 years later, again in the spring, there was a theft at the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. And this is an overhead view of the Museum of Fine Arts, and I'm showing it to you. I don't know if you can see my prompt, but maybe 2/3 of the way up the picture, you see the Fenway. And yes, that's the same road that leads to Fenway Park. And it also goes by the Gardner Museum, which is around here, the 9 o'clock position in that photo, and the giant Museum of Fine Arts. And that's a brilliant getaway route. It's one way, and it leads you to all points, north, south, east, and west. And if there's no traffic, the police are never going to catch you. They're not going to know which way you went. And it has that handy circular drive in front of the museum too, just like Worcester. So one afternoon, a van pulls up in front of the Museum of Fine Arts, and the driver and a cohort stay inside, and 2 men get out and they enter the museum as visitors. And they go inside and they go right to the 2nd floor to the Dutch area. And they take this painting from the wall, Girl with a Fur Trimmed Cloak, stolen, April 1975. This was a wise choice in a dastardly deed. This is on an oak panel. They yanked it right from the wall. They shoved a guard aside, again, an elderly guard. They made their way out of the building. As they went down the front staircase, police gave chase. But before they left the building, again, in a cement and marble enclosed area, they fired warning shots, scared the dickens out of everybody, ran down the stairs again, turned and fired warning shots at the staircase. This man, a guard at the museum, who was a former Boston police officer, but now unarmed, gave chase, ran after this Rembrandt painting and grabbed onto it and had a short tug of war until he was struck in the head, as you can see, showing his injury here, but with the butt of a gun. And the thieves made off with this painting. Now, this is just a tremendously beautiful Rembrandt work. It reminds me again of the last one I showed you. I always tell people, and I think that Colin and Nelda will agree, that if you have a favorite painting, you must make the effort to go see it at some point in your lifetime, because what you've seen in a high resolution image, like I'm showing you now, is nothing compared to the painting. This is owned by private owners, so it's rarely seen. And I got to see it in North Carolina back in 2012. And when I saw it, it buckled my knees. It's so absolutely gorgeous. I just love this painting. At the time it was stolen, it was called Portrait of Elizabeth van Rijn. It was thought to be Rembrandt's sister, but instead the Rembrandt Research Project, these Dutch art experts who examined the attribution of Rembrandt paintings around the world, determined it was not his sister. Nevertheless, it's a remarkably good painting that is often used to compare other Rembrandts to, because the handiwork is just so magnificent. So the men have made off with this painting. I'm sorry, going backwards here. And they're going in a cloud of smoke, and they're not like the thieves in Worcester. They don't make silly mistakes. They don't tell the public that they've done it. There are no clues. There are no leads. There's no physical evidence to go on. Nobody knows what happened. Well, here's what happened. This man here is Miles J. Connor. I know Miles really well. He is the world's greatest art thief. He's from Massachusetts, of course. And in 1974, Miles and some friends went up to Maine, northern state in New England for you people in Georgia. And they went to a place called the Woolworth Estate, which belonged to the Woolworth family, the famous five and dime family. And this estate had over 100 paintings in it, great collection of art. And in 1972, 50 of them were stolen. Bad guys got word that there were 50 more, and Miles and his friends went there to have a look. They wound up stealing a bunch of furniture and samurai swords and silver, lots of valuables. Miles took 3 works by the Wyatts. By flashlight, he recognized. And what makes Miles so amazing as an art thief is that he's done it not once or twice, but more times than he can recount. He's robbed every place you can imagine and that he's been to, except for the Gardner Museum, which he intended to rob, but never did. He was in jail at the time of our heist. Miles has got a lot of attention of late because there was a documentary on Netflix about my case, which little editorial I never watched, but he was in it, and people really were fascinated by him. But he's stolen everything from everywhere, and he knows art, and his motives have always been different from other art thieves. It's not about money solely for Miles. Well, he's at the Woolworth Estate, and he has these paintings by the Wyatts. And what happens is, not long after, he's arrested with them in a sting operation pulled off by the FBI. At the time, he's out on bail for having stolen some art on state charges. So now he's really in trouble. And the FBI agent who arrests him tells him, "Let's see you get out of this one, Connor." And Miles says back to him, "Just you watch me." That's the sort of attitude Miles has. And he goes to see a state trooper detective he knows, a very powerful one, because Miles's father is a police officer, an honest cop. And his brother is the chaplain for the Boston police. And his other brother's a state trooper. And he always says, "I don't know where they all went wrong," because Miles was a career criminal. Because of those connections, he's able to get this meeting with this important detective who tells him, "Miles, they really got you now. It's going to take a Rembrandt to get you out of this." So he inadvertently sent a light bulb off on over Miles's head. And months later, Miles went to the MFA and stole this Rembrandt to get out of trouble for stealing the Wyatts. When he did this, it became really the first time on a big scale that a thief stole a masterwork to use as a get out of jail free card. That's exactly the purpose of this theft. It wasn't for the money. It wasn't to try to cash it in. Months later, after recovery, this painting was sold at auction, and it was the biggest sale of a Dutch master in history at the time. So it was super valuable, but that's not why he took it. He took it to trade. And he didn't get out of jail necessarily, but he was facing consecutive sentences, and he wound up with concurrent sentences at a reduced rate. So he didn't serve more than, I think at the time, was 6 years. So it worked out well for Miles. It worked out well for everybody except those who tried to see this painting at the MFA, because the private owners didn't give it back to the MFA when it was recovered. And they eventually, as I mentioned, sold it. So this was the second most important art theft, I would argue. And it's because art became a commodity in a different way. It became a valuable chit to use to negotiate with prosecutors. Now, these things don't only happen in Massachusetts, they happen around the world. Rembrandt's stolen everywhere. So this painting, the portrait of Jacob de Geyn III, was taken from the Dulwich Picture Gallery in 1962, along with this Rembrandt, Girl at a Window. But this one's significant because it was stolen 4 times from the same institution over the course of about 25 years. That's why it's called the Takeaway Rembrandt. It's the most often stolen painting in the world. And here's a picture of the gallery after the first big heist, What happened was a thief broke in through this side entrance, cut a hole through the door, a small hole, as you can tell, and crawled through, took paintings small enough to crawl back out with, and made off. And interestingly, from a security point of view, I understand why he cut that hole to get in, but I don't know why he didn't just open the door to get out. But he crawled back through, and here's a detective figuring out, telling, hey, boss, this is how I think they got in. What happened was, it was old-fashioned detective work. This is 62. It's long before forensics came into the picture. What the detective did was notice that there were muddy tracks on the floor. And he called the maintenance people and asked how the place was heated. And they said from below. And based on how dry the mud was, he was able to estimate the distance the thief could have got away. And he used that to make a perimeter. And thanks to that perimeter, they found the getaway car. And they caught the thief, who they called the rubber bone thief, because of that small hole. But it was stolen 3 more times and recovered each time after that. In the 1930s, Sir Edmund Davis had bought the Chilham Castle in Great Britain, this enormous Hogwarts type castle, so big that when thieves broke into it over the Christmas holiday, and holidays are a very precarious time for museums and for art, they took 19 works. They made a mess of the place like this, but the castle is so big, nobody heard it. And there were 3 families staying there. And I show you this because they took this Rembrandt called Sasuke at her toilet, and sadly, they burned this painting. It's the only masterpiece I can find that was proven to have been destroyed by the thieves. And it was 80 some odd years ago. But you can see this is the best image you're ever going to see of Saskia at her toilet. And you understand what a tragic loss it is for the art world. This is not at all like seeing the painting. This is like maybe like hearing a cover band play Let It Be or something. It's just not the same. Even Rembrandt's own house in Amsterdam has been robbed a number of times, but the paintings there are not originals. Nevertheless, thieves have stolen prints and engravings and etchings. But that brings us to the bane of my existence, the Gardner Museum theft, which is highlighted in great measure by the exhibition that is hosting this talk. And as you might know, it was March 18, 1990 at 1:24 in the morning, just after St. Patrick's Day had ended. Celebrations were wrapping up or over, and 2 police officers approached the side entrance at the museum, and they rang the buzzer, the employee entrance, and there were 2 overnight guards, and the guard behind the desk answered, and they said Boston police were responding to a disturbance. And based on that alone, the guard let these men into the museum through 2 doors. It's a man trap situation, so you have to wait for the door to close before the next door will open. And the 2 thieves came in, and these are the sketches of them. Now, you see 4 people here, and that's because the 2 guards who encountered these police officers couldn't agree for sure which of the police officers had a fake mustache. And that sounds absurd, but the fact is these guards had only encountered these men for, 90 seconds looking at them. The man on the top did all the talking. The other one just kind of stood back by a staircase. And he said to the guard at the desk, "We're just responding to a disturbance. Anything going on?" And the guard says, "No." And he says, "Do you have anybody working with you tonight?" And the guard says, "Yes." And he tells him to get him downstairs, and he does. And maybe 35 seconds elapse when the second guard arrives. And the man on the top says to the guard behind the desk, "You look familiar to me. Do I know you from somewhere?" And he tells him, "No, I don't think so." So "Let me see your ID." So he hands over his driver's license, and the officer looks at it and says, "Yeah, there's a warrant out from you. Come out from behind that desk." Now, when the guard does this, there's nobody near the duress button or the telephone. There's no way to contact the outside world at this point. Then the police officer tells the guards, "You 2 assume the position." And some of you might remember that's something they used to say in old cop shows. It kind of meant stand up against the wall with your hands on the wall and prepare to be frisked. And they did. And the cops put handcuffs on the thieves on the guards, and said, "Gentlemen, this is a robbery. If you do what we say, no one's going to be harmed. We're just here for the paintings. Don't put up a fight." And one of the guards, the one who let them in, said, "They don't pay us enough to put up a fight." And it's true, they don't. Again, they're not Navy SEALs, they're not trained in hand-to-hand combat, they're not armed. But it is a snarky response, but it's true. Now, again, I mentioned that these are the only descriptions that we got from the guards. And as you might know, eyewitness accounts are notoriously unreliable. These are only really useful in the sense for elimination. So we know the thieves weren't women. We know they weren't people of color. We know that they have local accents. We know that they were average height and average builds. They were just your typical white guys from Boston with not much to go on. Again, just good for elimination. Think about yourself when you go to Whole Foods or Walgreens later. You'll go to the register, and later on, you might remember if it was a man or a woman, or you might remember the person's ethnicity. I shouldn't even say ethnicity. I mean, their skin tone is the best you can determine. But what you don't do is study their face in case you have to describe it to an artist later. You just don't do that. Humans don't do that. And in America, especially, we're notoriously bad at eye contact and such things. So that's why these sketches are really useless. So the guards are now handcuffed. Duct tape is applied to their wrists and around their faces, and they're led down into the basement. One is tied up right at the bottom of the stairs near a wash basin. The other is taken about 50 yards away, and this is him. This is the guard who let the thieves in that night. And as you can tell, he doesn't look like your prototypical guard. He's not dressed professionally. He's completely out of uniform. It reminds me to tell you I was not the security director at the museum when this theft happened. I would never allow red corduroys, such a fashion faux pas, or that haircut. Those would not cut it on the job. But that's the guy at the time. And you can see even his ankles are duct tape, so he can't make a run for it. The thieves then went upstairs directly to the Dutch room on the second floor. And this is a view the next morning through the door. And you see that blank wall, which used to hold Rembrandt's Storm in the Sea of Galilee, the painting in the center. That is a large painting. It's 5 feet by 4 feet. Taking the frame from the wall was a two-man job. The stretcher is rosewood, it's heavy. That's why the painting was cut from its frame, because far too cumbersome and heavy to carry it out. However, the paintings were most likely, and I would say this with very strong certainty, not rolled. You can tell this by the dearth of remnants from the painting on the floor. You can see what's left from the cutting, but these were thick paintings. And if someone had tried to roll them, they would have seen right away it was a mistake. It would have a lot of flaking of paint, large flakes. You would have seen the canvas crinkle. You would have seen right away you were making a mistake, and you would have stopped. Again, it's like a big piece of cardboard. On the same wall, the south wall of the gallery, the thieves took Lady and Gentleman in Black, which is only slightly smaller and also very valuable. So this one here in the center, Storm in the Sea of Galilee, it should be noted that it was likely the most popular painting in the city. And again, I don't know if you can see my prompt, but here at around the 6 o'clock position of the painting, Rembrandt has painted himself amongst the 12 apostles and Christ. Just a really moving portrait. And it's historically important because the only time Rembrandt painted a seascape, which is amazing to consider in his full body of work. And it's a great seascape. And people would come and really study it and take it in. In contrast, they also took this little etching in the top left-hand corner, and that etching, what you're looking at on your screen, is far bigger than it is in life. It's only 2 inches by 2 inches. So what they did was come to our museum and try to take all of our Rembrandts, and they took these three and they took a fourth, a self-portrait, off of the wall, but forgot it, thank God. So we still have it. This painting in the center, the Storm, is the second most valuable stolen thing in the world. These are some of the other pieces that were stolen. So you see some Degas works here. You see a landscape painting by Govert Flinck. The thieves definitely believed this to be a Rembrandt. Mrs. Gardner thought it was a Rembrandt when she purchased it. It wasn't until around 1980 that the Rembrandt Research Project got to this painting and determined it was by his great student, Govert Flinck. So it's still a incredibly well-regarded landscape. It's an oil on oak, which was stolen, not cut from its frame. They took this Chinese beaker and this Napoleonic finial, which are really incongruous with the masterworks that they took that night. They took this painting, Chez Tortoni by Edouard Manet, which is fascinating to me because if that was the only thing stolen that night, the only one, we'd still be having this talk and we'd still be talking about the great Gardner art heist. But because it's lumped in with all of these other masterworks, it's almost forgotten. And when I talk about being lumped in, how can anything compare to being next to or grouped with a Vermeer? So here in the center, you have the great Johannes Vermeer's The Concert, one of only 36 works by the master, the only one in New England, larger than most of his paintings from the mid to later part of his career. Just absolutely gorgeous work that is the single most valuable stolen thing in the history of mankind. And it's been missing for 31 years. It is the white whale of art theft. So I know it's in your exhibition, nothing more fitting than this painting because nothing more valuable has ever been stolen. Here's a close-up of what it looks like when they cut the paintings out. So that other large Rembrandt, this one, Lady and Gentleman in Black, was on this stretcher. So the white wood here had the canvas around it, the frame was over it. When they cut it, they didn't cut really well through it. And these bands of canvas are not from the painting, they're from a supporting canvas. So that's not some garish destruction of the painted canvas, it's supporting canvas. So I should mention, related to the Gardner, from day one, we've had a reward for the paintings, $1 million immediately, and then it went to $5 million in 1997. 20 years later, in 2017, we took that, which was the biggest private reward ever offered, and doubled it. So today we have a $10 million reward simply for the information that leads us directly to the art. And the investigation continues. It's me partnered with an FBI agent, Jeff Kelly from the FBI art crime team. We work on this every day. I talk to him every single day. We're constantly chasing down leads. We have a lot of good info we could never share with the public, but it's the sort of stuff combined with our reward and the willingness of the government to entertain immunity that makes me very confident that one day we'll see these paintings home again. I want to close with this interesting story. Shortly after my book came out, in which I cataloged the 82 Rembrandts that were stolen, a 83rd was stolen. And it was a drawing called The Last Judgment by Rembrandt, stolen in LA County. And the sheriff's department took over the case in Marina del Rey, and they did something really smart. 2011 is a long time ago in terms of internet years. And this painting, what they did was blast this all over the internet. So though it wasn't a famous image, it became a famous image. They made it too well known to sell. It was brilliant. It was valued at about $250,000. So it wasn't one of these multi-million-dollar pieces. And while they were blasting it all over the internet, I was doing interviews in LA telling the media, I have a message for the thieves. You've stolen a picture, not a problem. I'm sorry, you've stolen a problem, not a picture. The best thing you can do is give it back and tell somebody, tell the authorities, and hope this whole thing goes away. And on the third day after the heist, that's what they did. They left it at a church in Marina del Rey. They called the pastor and the painting was recovered. And here it is being recovered in LA County. And I show you this because I envision an Amber Alert type system in which when the circumstances are right, like they were in this one, and you can get this image out quickly and the message out quickly, it can lead to a quick return of art. Before I close and take questions, I wanted to mention my latest book, The Woman Who Stole Vermeer, is out now. It just came out in paperback. It is something I'm very proud of, and it tells the story of the only woman to ever pull off the heist of a masterpiece, and she did it a number of times, and she stole Vermeers. And her life story is one of radicalism, feminism, and high art. And I hope you pick it up if you enjoy art theft. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions you might have.
Well, thank you, Anthony. That was certainly fascinating. Yes, we will see if we have any questions, but maybe I have one for you, if you don't mind.
No.
What would you say then after, with your experience, what would you say is the motivation still for people to try to pull art heists if, like you said, it's more of a problem than anything else, and rarely can they sell it or can they actually get what maybe they thought they could financially? And because there's been so many art heists, why are they still doing it if they see it's been unsuccessful in terms of, getting a profit from it?
Well, that's a great question, Nelda. That's at the crux of this. It's incredibly rare, and I mean in the 0.01% of cases that art is stolen for any reason other than money. And that's one of the things I like about this book I'm showing now. Her reason had nothing to do with money, it was activism. Thieves do it for money because they don't know what becomes of stolen art. I talk to art historians all the time who don't know what becomes of stolen art, never mind thieves. They figure they can sell it, and it's not as hard to steal as other stuff. It's hard, but it's not as hard. So why not give it a try? And that's why these things are hard to find, because you can't sell them. So thieves wake up the next day, they find out this thing's all over the newspaper, just like the Gardner paintings. The thieves didn't realize the next day the newspaper was going to say $300 million or 200 million, whatever. They thought it was going to be $5 or $10 million, right? Now the whole world's looking at them. Forget it. So you put the stuff in hiding, or you give it to someone for $10,000 and they put it in hiding, that sort of thing. And you hope they can use it as a get out of jail free card. But thieves don't do research. They don't attend lectures on art theft at the University of Georgia. They don't study, so they don't know, and they take the gamble, and it happens endlessly. When lockdown happened because of COVID, I predicted publicly that there would be museum thefts. In the first day of lockdown at Oxford University, there were 4 paintings stolen.
Yes.
A couple of days later in the Netherlands, there was a Van Gogh stolen. And then I think 9 months later, there was a Frans Hals stolen in the Netherlands too. So people do it thinking they can monetize them, and they can't.
Well, yeah, and I was also stunned by how many happen. I guess we know about the most popular one, but the sheer number you said, and also how there's a specific list of artists that are more, vulnerable, and how more, a work of art is stolen more than once. I will appreciate, as an art historian, that you mentioned how important it is to see the original works of art and not reproduction. So
absolutely.
I do have some questions here, just 2 or 3, if you don't mind. I have a question from Colin, who says, what made you choose to jump from Homeland Security shortly after 9/11 to art theft security?
Good question, Colin. I was doing security at Logan Airport, which was the airport from which the 2 aircraft that struck the Twin Towers departed. And that was literally 16 hours a day, every day for 5 years, and very high stress. And I accomplished everything I wanted to accomplish. Everything was set up that I had dreamed of setting up there. And I felt like I needed a new challenge. And I saw the museum, the Gardner Museum, the biggest heist ever. So I went from the airport from which the biggest terrorist attack ever was launched to the museum at which the biggest property theft ever occurred. So I like these big security projects like that, and I love investigations, and both jobs allowed me to do both.
Great. Malia asks, what sort of punitives are in place for these art thieves?
Say that again?
What sort of punitives are in place for these art thieves, or what kind of punishment do they get?
Oh, punitives. I'm sorry. Good question, Malia. That's really important to the talk I just gave, because the 3 that I talked about all occurred before the federal government passed legislation making this sort of crime very severe, right? So the feds had not, before the Gardner, not until 94, had not really codified art theft as a major federal crime with severe penalties. And believe it or not, before 1994, Ted Kennedy introduced this legislation after being lobbied by the Gardner. The statute of limitations for art theft was 5 years. So if you stole a painting and you held it for 5 years, which is not hard, you could not be prosecuted after that for the theft. I mean, you could be prosecuted for possession of stolen property, but you could never get in trouble for the theft. That increased the statute to 15 years in terms of statute of limitations, and the penalties are much more severe. Art theft is a much more severe crime. So I can't quote the sentences to you because there's a lot of different things that come into play, the sorts of things stolen, what sort of thing you've done in concert with the theft, and of course, possession. But I can tell you that I hate to say even a silver lining, there's no silver lining, but after the Gardner theft, art is even almost sort of defined by the law too, in terms of the value. I think it's $100,000 or more for it to be a federal crime, or 100 years old or more for it to be like an antiquity by federal designation. So those are the sorts of things that they look at now. Good question.
So now we have a question from Eva Jane. Maybe this is something you want to look into. Why aren't some kind of tracking tags placed on artwork so it can be located if stolen?
Oh, I look at that all the time. I look at that all the time. That's the one technology that's not advancing quickly enough. So just think about it. The first thing that would come to mind would be GPS, of course, right? But GPS requires a power source. So let's suppose you go to the Gardner Museum, which is not huge, right? You take 7,500 pieces, and just the idea of having to track the power sources on those 7,500 is onerous, right? But let's suppose you just put it on the top 100 most vulnerable pieces. You still have to track those. Moreover, what really worries me is that if a thief takes a painting and sees a tracking device on the back of a canvas, that canvas is in real jeopardy because they're going to rip that tracking device off. So you have to secure it enough so it doesn't fall off or come off easily. Conversely, that means the canvas is going to get destroyed, which is far worse than a theft. And the natural question would be, well, can't you put it on a frame? Well, they usually leave the frames behind. Well, can't you put it on a stretcher? Well, they'll cut out the painting. So we really are waiting for the day that nanotechnology catches up. And my prediction for you is that it won't be GPS, but it'll be like this brilliant Apple device. What's it called? Apple Track? I'm sorry, I even have some, I can't remember the name, forgive, AirTag. And they're about the size of a coin. The problem with the art installations is that they're thick, but the battery lasts for quite some time, and it doesn't work off of GPS. It works off of the fact that there are 1 billion iPhones out there that can track this piece, just like they would track your phone if it was missing. I think that holds a lot of promise for the future, but as of now, there's no reliable, safe tracking device.
Yeah, and you touched on something important, on cost, and we all know museums have no money. So that's also, is kind of setting up that structure, monitoring it, paying for it. So maybe for your future career. So have you, Liz asked, have you been approached as a consultant on a movie comedy?
Yeah, not comedies, because I don't. If I was, I would turn it down. I don't find humor in art theft. And I know
that you are funny. You are funny, though.
These things are really crazy. They are funny. Some of them, the people are funny. But I will say that I'm approached a lot about that. I'm approached a lot about, like, there was this Netflix documentary I refused to be part of because I have very exacting standards about the credibility of the people who appear in these things. I keep getting calls about questions that come up from the documentary, and I'm appalled because I didn't watch it, but I'm appalled at what they say in these things that are just so factually untrue. Always watch, I always tell students, when you watch documentaries or listen to crime podcasts, put your antenna up and notice who is not interviewed. If the investigators are not interviewed, there's so much you don't know. So in the Gardner podcast and the Gardner documentary, I will tell you, they know maybe 10% of the story. The FBI and I share a 70,000 page file, 70,000 pages on this case that the documentarians do not have access to. So but I do write these books, so thank you for asking about that. And I'm fastidious. This book here is 250 pages. It has 600 footnotes. I'm very, very worried about getting everything accurate. And when people approach me about doing films, if they have to do it the Gardner, I say no, because I don't want to make money on our tragedy.
Right. Well, on that note, there's Colin who says, super interesting stuff. Other than your books, is there anywhere we can see you talk more about this? So
there's some older stuff on YouTube. If you stay up late one night and you flick channels, you'll see me on some bad crime show on like 20 most, that sort of thing. And that's when we were really working hard to get the images. See, when I took over in 2005, I had to resurrect the story. It had so I was going on every show you can imagine to resurrect the story. I would say in terms of reading stuff, I would read newspaper stories from the Hartford Courant, because that I can tell you that those are right on the money. And in the Boston Globe, Shelley Murphy, but only Shelley Murphy in the Boston Globe, not Steve Kirkshin, only Shelley Murphy.
yeah, that's interesting when this is your daily reality. And then, like you said, I guess documentaries or what is claimed as documentary may be sometimes more entertaining or
Definitely.
entertainment than veracity. I just have two last questions. Jean asks, any ideas where the works from the gardener might be? I'm sure you get that all the time. She says, have heard they might be resting on the ocean's floor.
Oh my God, no, definitely not.
No.
Definitely not in the ocean floor. Absolutely not. There's one thing I've learned about fine art is it doesn't get destroyed because it's far too valuable and so easy to hide, right? Think about the Degas drawings that were taken. They're all 8x10s. Why would you destroy those? You could put them in a book. How will we ever find that? No, they're definitely not destroyed. And they're probably in the greater Boston, New Englandish area. Not very far. Paintings like this don't travel far and they never leave the US. They come to the US, but they never leave the US. So, but if I had a direct idea, I wouldn't be talking to you right now. I'd be there.
True. Well, one last comment is from Anita. She says, I think it's very effective that the museum staff have left the blank spaces where the stolen paintings had hung. Please pass that along. Really brings home the loss. So, and I think I think it's a great way to kind of end this presentation, because that is one thing that Kota Ezawa, the artist, was working on when he did his, take on the heist, when he was talking about this notion of loss and memory and how a loss is almost just as present as a presence. You feel a loss just as you feel something that's right there. So he touches on that in his approach to this.
Well, I remember when they presented that to us, and my point of view is different, and everybody's point of view is valid when it comes to art. But these frames are hung there because Mrs. Gardner's will says the only place these paintings can ever hang is the Gardner Museum, right? So, another thing that makes these things unique is that they can only be in those spots. So we put the frames up and we say these paintings will return here.
Yeah.
We have hope. So I view these empty frames as signs of hope, right? Why else would you put empty frames up but to say we're going to fill them again? This is their home. And that's how I view them.
Well, I hope you're right. And I hope they will come home.
They will.
Those paintings and those works of art and all the others that are stranded out there. So Anthony, I can't thank you enough. I've had other comments of how wonderful this was. I'm sure you've heard this before, but it was truly fascinating, really generous of you to share all of this with us. And I'm glad that we had a chance to spend some time together. And thank you to all the attendees and participants.
Completely my pleasure. Take care, everybody. Stay safe.
Thank you.